Hey everyone, welcome back. I appreciate the subs and the comments and the likes. Seems a little bit of growing's happening. Pretty glad about that. When I do videos like this and I talk about my interests or hobbies or views on something, I'm not so much interested in, oh, do you agree with me or not? And stuff like that. I'm more interested in, do you relate or not? And not necessarily on the content, but the way it's perceived. If you're schizoid yourself or deal with a different kind of PD that is socially averted, perhaps our views are similar, our interests similar, if not in exactly what they are, but in the way we appreciate them. So that's what I'm more curious about than anything else. So I want to talk a little bit about how I ended up having a love of horror and everything spooky. Growing up, I spent most of my time playing video games and reading books and all sorts of stuff, watching TV shows and, things like X-Files and so on. But book reading was probably my favorite pastime outside of video games when I was a kid and in junior high and such. I was particularly fond of when the elementary schools would have their, what did you call them? Where they would sell the Scholastic thing, where they would, the book fair. There you go, the book fair. I liked the book fair. That was like my favorite thing that would happen because, they would have this variety of books and essentially your parents would feel obligated in getting you books because all the other kids were getting books. Not always the case, but in my case, I was lucky enough to, get money out of them so I can get some books. If there's one thing I can credit my mother, it's that she wouldn't deny me books at almost any turn, which was good. Anything else, yeah. My other hobbies were of little interest to her. But books, she had it in her mind that reading was good. Reading is good and makes you smarter and all that stuff. Though she didn't do much reading herself, she felt that reading was important. She had that notion in her mind, so that worked out for me. I was able to get a lot of books. So when these book fairs would come around, I would always want to pick up either some of the horror fiction, the over-the-top any kind of fantasy fiction, the gross-out stuff, or paranormal type little scholastic books, the ones that would talk about vampires or would talk about the Bermuda Triangle or the Loch Ness Monster, all the stuff that you would find interesting as a kid. Well, at least I did. Initially, I had more of a preoccupation with fantasy. I liked books like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and stuff like that growing up. I actually recently started rereading a lot of that stuff because, I don't know, I just want to see how my perspectives changed since then. Oftentimes when you read a book when you were a kid and then you read it much later, years and years later, you almost appreciate it more, you appreciate it differently. Well, it's kind of strange. It's a weird experience. If you read a book you really liked in your teens and you're already mid-20s or you're hitting your 30s, I would suggest rereading that favorite book you liked. It's kind of, this is nostalgic, yes, but it's also interesting to see how your perspectives have changed, or you find things within it that you didn't notice the first time around. Movies were always a big thing for me too. Usually like fantasy films, horror films, sci-fi, especially sci-fi. I really like science fiction. Later, a little bit later in life, I really got into martial arts movies, like the kung fu flicks. They were really fun. I liked the over-the-top fighting, and from there, I think from my interest in martial arts type movies, it extended into anime and things like that in my teenage years and so on and so forth. And of course, its association to video games and things. I remember I would read a lot of Stephen King just because I was told that it wasn't for kids. You know how that is. So, I read stuff like The Shining. I read stuff like It and Tommy Knockers, all that kind of stuff, Cujo. Just because I had a lot of violence and sexy stuff that, I wasn't supposed to be reading as a young man. But, it's just a curiosity, And my parents, they wouldn't know. They wouldn't really understand what it was I was getting at that garage sale. They just thought it was some scary book about ghosts or something. At least that's what I would tell them. But God knows it was a lot more than fucking ghosts, right? That's what's interesting about King. And it's partially why I'm not into him anymore, really. King had a lot of content in his books where it had an emphasis on the human condition, like human horror, and usually the people were more terrible than any creature or thing chasing them. And when he would get into these inner monologues about the protagonist or other people in the story, they would often be really awful people, really perverse, fucked up thoughts. And one great example, which he wrote under a pseudonym, was the Regulators, yeah, under Richard Bachman, I think. Same as Thinner. Yeah, man, if you watch any movie versions of all these things, they don't capture that. Just the people are so gross. They're just awful, usually. Just selfish, terrible people. And maybe that's just what he's going for. Maybe that's just how he feels about people in general. So he would reflect that. Or he's mirroring something about himself. I don't know. I'm not into King. For that reason, I didn't really gravitate toward that style of horror. I don't really care about people's thoughts and feelings about all this gross shit that goes through their mind. That's fine, but I just don't see any interest in that. They just annoy me or creep me out in a bad way. In a more of a, like, why am I reading this? You're a piece of shit. This is fucking terrible. I don't feel bad for you getting killed or eaten by that thing or whatever it is that is chasing you. It's not always the case with King books. I've read a few that I really liked. One that wasn't really horror, but it was just interesting, was The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. I actually enjoyed that one. It was a short one, but it was fun. It was good. But anyway, I'm detouring all crazy. But there's a reason I kind of mentioned that the reason I never got into King, especially now, why it doesn't quite interest me like it did initially for the shock value when I was younger. Because I found Lovecraft and Poe, but especially Lovecraft. I'm that kid. I'm that guy. I'm that little edgelord that loves his Lovecraft. And the reason for my endearment to his short stories and anything associated to him, even his letters, were interesting. His views, obviously, were issues, or are an issue for a lot of people today. But I'm indifferent to that. I don't really give a shit. I found the guy fascinating. I found the guy very interesting. Very strange, in a good way, and I wouldn't say relatable, but in certain aspects, the solitude, the kind of I don't want to use the introverted kind of disgust with the outside world. It's something I was able to relate to when it came to him, and obviously it has a lot to do with being schizoid and everything. But what I found most interesting about Lovecraftian style horror, it was the emphasis on the objects, the things, the experience, the external of what the characters were doing. And I always found that really interesting, that there wasn't an emphasis placed on the importance of the people involved in the story. It was more about their situation, the contents or the context in which they were living and experiencing horrible, dreadful things with tentacles coming out of the dark. It was the way he wrote it and what he placed his focus on that attracted me the most, I think. I've heard a variety of reviews and reasons for why people really love Lovecraft, and the Eldritch horror style, the existential horror, and all that. I appreciate all of it. It's wonderful. But a lot of what made me love it was the writing style and where he would hone his focus. It wasn't so much on the people. It was just on the things that, shuffled through the dark. which is really funny if you've ever read any, because he doesn't give very good descriptions of these things, which is the point. It's, fear through obscurity of something, or obscuring something. But even then, people were not the important factor. In fact, people were insignificant. They were pointless little trinkets to be played with by these cosmic, eternal beings. And yeah, it was scary. It was scary to have a story kind of confirm that sense of chaotic meaninglessness. And it was spooky. It was scary to the core in its own sense, that existential terror. But the way it was written is what made it so fascinating. There was no hope. There was no sense of, oh, well, these cosmic horrors may not, in fact, be the, the beginning and end of all our existence. No. Within Lovecraft, they were everything. They were far greater, far more all-encompassing. And if anything had any form of intrinsic value, it was not us. It was those things. Shub-Niggurath and Cthulhu and Nyarlathotep and all those wonderful characters. One of my favorites, Hastur. The king in yellow. And I think that's also why I really enjoyed Tolkien as well. I really enjoyed Lord of the Rings, because it was an epic tale, and there was characters, and you would see those characters grow, but they were growing because of their experiences. And like I said, there was something greater than them. There was something more interesting than them that's being discussed. A bigger picture, a larger scale type concept or idea. Sometimes symbolic, sometimes metaphorical, but nonetheless, it was something grander than they. The emphasis wasn't on the emotional development or arc or feelings or intimacy of the characters. I felt it was about something bigger than that. And that's probably what I enjoyed the most about that style. A kind of epic style of telling a story. My enjoyment of horror literature extended then into, video games and stuff. I enjoyed my Resident Evils. I enjoyed my Silent Hills, especially my Silent Hills, and anything of that style. Fatal Frame for anyone who's ever played those. Then, of course, it extended into film, especially film in my early 20s. I really enjoyed everything and anything coming out of Korea and Japan, some Taiwanese stuff as well. French horror was interesting, but that's still, again, that one was weird, because that one's a lot of more kind of like torture porn kind of stuff, as some people like to call it. The French are really good at that violence, but again, they place a strong emphasis on the emotional arcs of the characters, and then they put them in these horrifying situations, and it's pretty gut-wrenching stuff, even for me. But I don't find it enjoyable. A lot of those French style like movies, like Martyrs and Inside, or other European films like Serbian film and things like that. I'm just like, okay, the human horror is not as relatable to me, because in my mind, I just think eradicate human beings that are like that. Just eradicate them, that want to harm, destroy the lives of others. Fuck them. I don't really feel the need to understand the complex nature of why they're killing, maiming people. I don't care. It's not a good excuse. Sorry, horrible things happen to you. You don't get to maim and kill people. So no sympathy there. I've always been more into cosmic style horror, or monsters, creatures, you know, things coming from the unknown, ghosts, the paranormal, the undead. All that stuff's always been really fun for me, really interesting to me. And not always scary either, just fascinating. And I think because of my interest in, you know, the morbid, the morbidly artistic, I also became interested in the occult. I started, you know, looking into that stuff, reading a lot of books, going to a lot of bookstores, looking for, you know, all sorts of literature that I can maybe talk about one day. But everything kind of revolved around spooky shit for me. Same with my music interests, you know, which I'll probably do some kind of recording on that in the future, which mostly consisted of, like, you know, metal, industrial, some goth stuff, all sorts of things, but also modern classical soundtracks, OSTs, things like that. Always really interesting to me. Some alt rock, all kinds of stuff. Like I said, I'll do something else on that another time. But I liked anything that was either miserable or spooky. Those were kind of my go-tos. Or angry. I liked angry. Angry was good. So I enjoyed myself a good horror revenge tale, you know. Something where something terrible would happen to a character and then they would go on a killing spree, you know, with righteous revenge, you know, for the hurting of those they loved or something. That was always fun. Very, very fun for me. And again, I'm trying to kind of word what it is that I love so much about horror and why it is my favorite genre. And I think it's the fear. It's the honesty of it, the sincerity that is fear. I've felt it. I used to get panic attacks and such, mostly existential terror combined with polychemical imbalances, which I've since rectified through therapy and medication. But I've tasted the void. I've tasted the fear, and something is so fascinating and interesting about it, and humbling, very humbling, when you see it. And as they say, it looks into you. And fear itself, I find exhilarating. I have this kind of sort of, well, I would say almost like a sadistic view on fear, like in the sense that, like, I wish I could inflict it without actually harming anyone. I just like the idea of creating fear or making someone or something afraid. Don't want to harm them. I have no interest in harming them. It's just seeing the terror in a character's or a person's eyes because they think something, a doom is waiting, a dread is rising. I find it interesting, and I've always found it just captivating. And I like to find it within myself too. That's why it's rare that I see anything or read anything horror related that actually gives me the quote unquote heebie-jeebies. But when it does, oh my, when it does, it's delightful, you know? It's just fucking delightful. But most of the time, I just enjoy the art, the beauty of the attempt of creating fear. I like watching movies with others that, you know, can feel more afraid than maybe me, and seeing terror in their eyes when something appears or something grotesque exhibits itself in front of them through this form of fiction or media. It's so much fun. I can't quite capture exactly why, but I think it is that. It's the sincerity of the whole thing, the honesty of the emotion. It's raw. It's uninhibited. It's fear. There's a beauty in it for me. Since, you know, I'm devoid of a lot of stuff. Also, us schizoids have a tendency to create very complex internal worlds that are private, very intimate to us. We don't generally share any of that. Now, I'm not about to right now, but I just wanted to share a little bit about what it mostly inhabits. Mine. It's mostly filled with spooky, scary skeletons. To put it lightly. And I often wonder, if other schizoids or other hyper introverts of any kind have these similar complex worlds, and what they're like. Because I have an appreciation for many genres of fiction. And trust me, I love myself some fantasy. I love myself some Dungeons and Dragons and all that sort of stuff. RPGs, role-playing games, things like that. I'm a very strong advocate of tabletop role-playing. I think it's a good exercise for the mind. Better than any television watching. That much can be garnered. I think my favorite part of D&D is when you dungeon master. You get to do the different voices. Sound like goblins. Stuff like that. Or creatures in the dark. And it's fun. You can do Lich King voices and all kinds of scary shit. That's probably one of my favorite things, is playing the villains. Lets me kind of pick a little bit of that internal world that I've created and throw some of it out there unknowingly to the players. I might as well throw it out there now. If you're listening to this and you're enjoying it in any way, shape, or form, sub, like, blah, 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 all that bullshit. Helps this stupid thing, whatever it is I'm doing, grow a bit. In fact, if you frequent any other PD, personality disorder related groups or anything, just go ahead and throw the link and share it if you want. I wouldn't mind. The more people that join up, the better. I get more comments, more things I can look at and think about. It's kind of what I'm in it for. But yeah, I think I just have a fascination with some of the more raw, animalistic sort of emotional expressions that human beings can display. Because what bothers me, or what confuses me and angers me the most about social interactions, are all these annoying fucking nuances, all these dishonest kind of tactics that people subconsciously use, maybe to get what they want, or because of insecurities or whatever the fuck it is that causes them. And so there's always this complex web of details that are just beyond me sometimes, and I don't understand their purpose, and they seem so inefficient and just useless. I mean, that's my perspective. I know they're not to them, and I respect that. I'm just saying, in my view. But, something like fear, and other kind of raw sort of emotional outbursts, rage, true rage, stuff like that is very honest, and I find a beauty in it, as strange as that may be to anybody listening. So if you find any of this relatable, tell me. If you think I sound nuts, tell me. You think I'm an idiot, tell me. It's fun either way. I just like reading the comments. I find them interesting, regardless of what's being said. And a lot of it's very amusing. But, what does your internal world, if you have a big one, consist of? What genre? What style? What aesthetic does it consist of mostly? I'm curious if you want to share that, if you feel like doing so. Or is your internal world less fantastical, perhaps more mechanical, more structured, more organized, more focused on the sciences, or other forms of more material sort of forms of existence? That's interesting too. I'd like to know. Mine's just spooky, scary skeletons. And rage-filled demons. and stuff like that. I wanted to finish this recording with, I guess, a poem by Lovecraft called Despair. O'er the midnight moorlands crying, through the cypress forest sighing, in the night wind madly flying, hellish forms with streaming hair, in the barren branches creaking, by the stagnant swamp pool speaking, past the shore, cliffs ever shrieking, damn the demons of despair. Once I think I half remember, ere the grey skies of November quenched my youth's aspiring ember, lived there such a thing as bliss. Skies that now are dark were beaming, bold and azure, splendid seeming, till I learned it was all dreaming, deadly drowsiness of this. But the stream of time sweet flowing brings the torment of half knowing, dimly rushing, blindly going, past the never trodden lea, and the voyager repining sees the wicked death fire shining, hears the wicked petrels whining, and he helpless drifts to sea. Evil wings in ether beating, vultures at the spirit eating, things unseen forever fleeting, black against the leering sky. Ghastly shades by bygone gladness, clawing fiends of future sadness, mingle in a cloud of madness, ever on the soul to lie. Thus the living, lone and sobbing, in the throes of anguish throbbing, with the lonesome furies robbing, night and noon of peace and rest. But beyond the groans and grating of abhorrent life is waiting, sweet oblivion culminating all the years of fruitless quest. So yeah, I love that shit. It's good stuff. In any case, comment, subscribe, like, blah blah blah. Thanks for listening. Hope you listen again.